The avoidant doesn't enter relationships randomly or chaotically. They follow a predictable pattern so consistent across partners and situations that you could set your watch by it. If you've been involved with an avoidant, you've experienced these 4 stages even if you didn't recognize them as stages at the time. Stage 1 is intense connection that feels almost too good to be true. Stage 2 is slow withdrawal, disguised as needing space or being busy. Stage 3 is hot and cold inconsistency that creates anxious attachment in you. Stage 4 is complete deactivation, where the avoidant either disappears or becomes so emotionally unavailable that the relationship effectively ends even if you're still technically together. Every avoidant moves through these 4 stages with every partner. The speed varies, the specific behaviors vary, the justifications vary, but the fundamental pattern is identical. Understanding these stages is crucial because it helps you recognize you're in a pattern that has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with the avoidant's unhealed attachment wounds. You didn't cause the stages. You can't prevent the stages. You're simply the current person experiencing stages. The avoidant has moved through with everyone before you and will move through with everyone after you, unless they do deep therapeutic work to heal their patterns. What makes these stages so damaging is that each one contradicts the previous one, creating cognitive dissonance that destabilizes your sense of reality. Stage 1 taught you the avoidant is capable of intense connection, so when stage 2 arrives with its withdrawal, you blame yourself rather than recognizing withdrawal is inevitable in the avoidance pattern. Stage 2 convinced you that if you just give them space, they'll return to stage 1 warmth. So when stage 3 brings inconsistency, you keep accommodating, hoping to restore what you had initially. Stage 3 has you so confused by the hot and cold that when stage 4's complete deactivation arrives, you're still trying to figure out what you did wrong instead of recognizing you've simply reached the inevitable conclusion of the avoidance relational cycle. Each stage sets you up to misinterpret the next stage, keeping you trapped in trying to restore something that was never sustainable in the first place. The 4 stages aren't conscious manipulation by the avoidant. They're the automatic unfolding of attachment patterns formed in childhood and reinforced through decades of relational experience. The avoidant isn't planning to move through these stages. They're not deliberately creating connection only to withdraw it. They're operating from a nervous system that interprets increasing intimacy as increasing threat, and the stages are their nervous system's predictable response to that perceived threat. Stage 1 happens when threat is low because the relationship is new and the avoidant hasn't become attached yet. Stage 2 begins when attachment starts forming and the nervous system identifies danger. Stage 3 is the avoidant's attempt to manage the tension between their desire for connection and their fear of it. Stage 4 is the nervous system's final solution. Eliminate the threat by eliminating the intimacy completely. Understanding the stages as nervous system response rather than personal rejection helps, but it doesn't make experiencing them any less painful or the relationship any more viable. Stage 1. The honeymoon phase that feels perfect. The first stage is characterized by the avoidant being more emotionally available, more present, more enthusiastic than they'll ever be again in the relationship. They're texting you consistently. They're making plans. They're introducing you to their friends. They're talking about future possibilities. They're vulnerable in ways that make you feel special and chosen. They're affectionate and warm and everything you could want in a partner. This stage feels intoxicating because the avoidant is genuinely engaged in ways that seem to promise real relationship. You're experiencing the version of them that's not defended, not withdrawn, not scared. And this version is compelling enough that it sustains you through the later stages when you're trying to get back to this initial connection. What you don't understand during stage 1 is that the avoidance availability is possible specifically because they're not attached yet. The relationship is new enough that their nervous system doesn't identify you as threat. They can be open because openness doesn't feel dangerous when they don't care deeply yet. They can be vulnerable because vulnerability doesn't risk real pain when genuine attachment hasn't formed. They can plan futures because future plans feel theoretical and distant rather than like actual commitment. The avoidant during stage 1 is operating in a sweet spot where the relationship provides connection and novelty without triggering their attachment fears. But this sweet spot is temporary by its nature. The relationship can't stay new. Attachment will form if connection continues. And once attachment forms, stage 2 becomes inevitable. Stage 1 is also characterized by the avoidant idealization of you. You seem perfect to them during this phase. They're not yet seeing your flaws clearly because they're in the infatuation stage where positive qualities are magnified and negative qualities are minimized or invisible. The idealization feels wonderful, but it's setting up future problems. When stage 2 arrives and they begin deactivating, they'll swing to the opposite extreme, focusing on your flaws and using those flaws to justify their withdrawal. But during stage 1, you're everything they want. You're special. You're different from everyone else they've dated. You're the one who finally makes them feel like relationship might be possible. This idealization is intoxicating, but it's not based on realistic perception of who you actually are. It's based on projection of what they hope you'll be, and projections always eventually collide with reality. The avoidant during stage 1 is often surprised by their own capacity for connection. They might tell you they usually don't feel this way. They might express that you're different from other people they've dated. They might seem almost confused by how much they're enjoying the relationship. This surprise is genuine. The avoidant isn't used to feeling this open, this available, this interested. But what they don't recognize is that these feelings are possible because the conditions that trigger their avoidance aren't present yet. They think they've found the right person who makes intimacy feel safe. What's actually happening is they're in the early stage where intimacy hasn't deepened enough to feel threatening. The conditions are creating the openness, not the person. And when the conditions change as intimacy naturally deepens, the openness will disappear regardless of how right you seem during stage 1. Stage 1 can last weeks or months, depending on the avoidant and the circumstances. Some avoidants move quickly through stage 1 into stage 2 within a few weeks. Others can maintain stage 1 for months if the relationship circumstances keep intimacy somewhat contained. Long-distance relationships or relationships where you don't see each other daily can extend stage 1 because the limited contact prevents intimacy from deepening quickly enough to trigger the avoidance fear. But regardless of how long stage 1 lasts, it always ends. It ends because intimacy naturally deepens in relationships where people continue spending time together. It ends because attachment forms when consistent positive experiences accumulate. It ends because the avoidance nervous system eventually recognizes they're starting to need you, and need activates all their attachment fears. Stage 2, the slow withdrawal that confuses you. Stage 2 begins subtly. The avoidant is still mostly present, still mostly warm, but small changes are occurring that create unease in you, even if you can't articulate what's different. They're slightly less responsive to messages, they're initiating contact less frequently, they're a bit less enthusiastic about making plans, they're creating small amounts of distance that individually seem insignificant, but collectively signal a shift. You notice these changes and you're confused because stage 1 was so good. You wonder if you did something wrong. You replay recent interactions looking for the moment you pushed them away. You don't realize that you didn't do anything. Stage 2 isn't about your behavior. It's about the avoidant's internal experience of developing attachment. The withdrawal during stage 2 is the avoidant's nervous system responding to recognizing they care about you. Caring about someone means needing them, means being vulnerable to being hurt by them. The avoidant's attachment history has taught them that vulnerability leads to pain, so their nervous system is initiating protective measures. The withdrawal is creating distance that makes the caring less dangerous. If they're not as close to you, if they're not as invested, losing you won't hurt as much. The withdrawal is preemptive protection against anticipated future pain. It's not rational. It's not based on anything you've done. It's automatic nervous system response to the threat their brain has identified. You're starting to matter too much. During stage 2, the avoidant begins finding small flaws in you that they use to justify the distance they're creating. The idealization of stage 1 is being replaced by more critical perception. They notice things about you that bother them. They focus on incompatibilities that seemed irrelevant during stage 1. They start questioning whether the relationship is really right. This shift from idealization to criticism isn't because you've changed. You're the same person you were during stage 1. But the avoidant's perception of you has changed because their level of attachment has changed. The growing attachment is triggering their fear, and focusing on your flaws helps them manage that fear by making you seem less perfect, less important, less worth being vulnerable for. The avoidant during stage 2 often becomes busy. They have more work commitments suddenly. They have more obligations to friends or family. They need more time alone to recharge. All of these explanations might be partially true, but they're also serving the function of creating justifiable distance. The avoidant is using external circumstances to create space that's really about internal discomfort. You accommodate the busyness because it seems legitimate. You give them the space they say they need because you want to be understanding. But accommodating stage 2 withdrawal doesn't prevent stage 3 from arriving. It just teaches the avoidant that you'll accept decreased availability, which makes it easier for them to continue decreasing it. Stage 2 is particularly confusing because the avoidant still has moments of warmth that remind you of stage 1. They're not completely withdrawn yet. They still reach out sometimes. They still make plans occasionally. They still have times when they're present and affectionate. These moments of warmth keep you hoping that things will return to how they were initially. You think if you just give them enough space, if you're patient enough, if you're understanding enough, they'll move back into stage 1 availability. But the moments of warmth during stage 2 aren't signs the avoidant is returning to stage 1. They're the avoidant managing their own ambivalence. They want connection and they fear connection, and the hot and cold of stage 2 is them trying to have both. Enough connection to not lose you entirely, and enough distance to not feel overwhelmed by their feelings. Stage 3, the hot and cold that makes you anxious. Stage 3 is characterized by dramatic inconsistency that creates anxious attachment in you, even if you entered the relationship with relatively secure attachment. The avoidant swings between warmth and coldness unpredictably. One day they're affectionate and engaged, texting you throughout the day, making plans for the future. The next day they're distant and unavailable, taking hours to respond, seeming bothered by your presence. The inconsistency is crazy-making because you can never predict which version of them you're going to get. You become hyper-vigilant, constantly monitoring their mood and availability, trying to figure out what makes them warm versus what makes them cold so you can behave in ways that keep them warm. The hot and cold of stage 3 is the avoidant's internal war, playing out in their external behavior. Part of them wants to be close to you. That part misses you when you're not around, feels good when they're with you, imagines a future together. But another part is terrified of the closeness, convinced that vulnerability will lead to pain, desperate to maintain independence and control. These two parts are battling constantly, and you're experiencing the casualties of that internal war. When the desire for connection wins temporarily, they're hot. When the fear of vulnerability reasserts itself, they're cold. Neither state is stable because neither part of their internal conflict is resolved. During stage 3, you become increasingly anxious about the relationship. You're constantly wondering where you stand. You're analyzing every interaction for clues about their feelings. You're walking on eggshells trying not to trigger their withdrawal. You're managing your own needs and emotions to avoid being too much for them. The anxiety you're experiencing is the direct result of the avoidance inconsistency. Intermittent reinforcement, where rewards come unpredictably, creates the strongest behavioral conditioning. The avoidant being warm sometimes, but not always, is training you to keep trying, keep pursuing, keep accommodating, because occasionally your efforts are rewarded with the warmth you're craving. Stage 3 is when the relationship dynamic becomes clearly dysfunctional. You're doing all the work. You're the one initiating most contact. You're the one making plans and adjusting those plans when they cancel. You're managing both your emotions and theirs. You're constantly trying to figure out what they need while your needs are going consistently unmet. The relationship has become about managing the avoidance comfort level rather than building mutual partnership. And the more you accommodate their hot and cold, the more they continue it because the dynamic is working for them. They get connection when they want it and space when they need it, all without having to be consistent or accountable. The avoidant during stage 3 often starts picking fights or creating conflict to justify their withdrawal. They're critical of you. They point out things you do that bother them. They express frustration with the relationship. The conflict serves multiple purposes for the avoidant. It creates emotional distance that feels like protection. It gives them justifiable reason to pull away. It makes you the problem rather than their fear being the problem. And it tests whether you'll stay through their poor treatment, which paradoxically makes them feel both more secure that you won't abandon them and more contemptuous of you for accepting treatment they know is unacceptable. Stage 3 can last a long time, sometimes months or even years. As long as you continue accommodating the inconsistency, as long as you keep accepting the hot and cold without enforcing boundaries, the avoidant has no motivation to move to either stage 4 or to do the work that would allow them to return to something resembling stage 1. Stage 3 is a kind of stalemate, where the relationship isn't healthy but isn't definitively ended. You're in limbo, always hoping for more warmth, always tolerating the coldness, always believing if you just do the right thing they'll stabilize. But the avoidant won't stabilize in stage 3. They'll either move to stage 4's complete deactivation, or you'll finally enforce boundaries that end the relationship. Stage 4, the complete deactivation that ends everything. Stage 4 is the avoidant shutting down completely. This looks different depending on the specific avoidant and situation, but the core is the same. They become so emotionally unavailable that the relationship is effectively over, even if you're still technically together. Some avoidants physically leave, ending the relationship explicitly and disappearing from your life. Others stay physically present but become so distant, so cold, so checked out that you're essentially alone in the relationship. The avoidant has fully deactivated their attachment system, and you're experiencing the result of that deactivation: complete absence of intimacy, vulnerability, or real connection. Stage 4 happens when the avoidant's fear becomes stronger than their desire for connection. The internal war that characterized stage 3 has been won by the fear side. The avoidant has decided, consciously or unconsciously, that the discomfort of intimacy is greater than the pain of losing you. They might tell themselves they're doing you a favor by ending things, that you deserve someone who can give you what they can't. They might focus on all your incompatibilities as justification for why the relationship won't work. They might just shut down without explanation, unable to articulate what's happening, because it's happening at a nervous system level they don't have conscious access to. The deactivation of stage 4 is often triggered by something that increases intimacy or commitment. Maybe you expressed that you love them. Maybe you talked about moving in together. Maybe you needed them during a crisis and they realized how much you've come to depend on them. Maybe nothing specific happened, but the accumulated intimacy of time simply reached their threshold. Whatever the trigger, the avoidance nervous system interprets the increased intimacy as threat level too high to tolerate, and deactivation is the emergency response. The avoidant is flooding with anxiety about vulnerability, about being trapped, about losing themselves, and shutting down feels like the only way to survive the psychological threat they're experiencing. During stage 4, the avoidant often becomes a different person than you knew during stage 1. They're cold in ways that seem cruel. They're dismissive of your feelings. They minimize the relationship and its importance. They might rewrite history, claiming they never felt as strongly as you thought, that you misread the connection, that they tried to keep things casual but you wanted more. This revisionist history is the avoidant protecting themselves from guilt and from their own feelings. If they can convince themselves the relationship was never that serious, if they can blame you for having expectations, they don't have to sit with the pain of acknowledging they're destroying something that mattered to them because they're too scared to continue it. You during stage 4 are devastated, confused, and desperate to understand what happened. Everything seemed fine, or at least manageable, and now suddenly they're completely gone. You're replaying the entire relationship, trying to find what you did wrong. You're reaching out, trying to get explanation or closure. You're hoping they'll return to who they were in stage 1 if you just say the right thing, or give them the right amount of space. But the avoidant can't return to stage 1 from stage 4 without intensive therapeutic work. They've moved through the entire cycle, and returning to the beginning requires dismantling the patterns that created the cycle in the first place. Most avoidants don't do that work. They just find someone new and start the 4 stages over with that new person. Stage 4 might include the avoidant breadcrumbing you occasionally to keep you as an option while maintaining their emotional distance. They text once in a while to check in. They reach out when they're lonely or when they see you're moving on. They keep minimal contact that prevents complete closure for you. The breadcrumbing serves the avoidant by keeping you available without them having to be available, maintaining a connection that requires nothing from them, while preventing you from fully releasing them and moving forward. If you respond to the breadcrumbing, if you stay available hoping it signals they might come back, stage 4 can extend indefinitely with you in limbo, waiting for a return to earlier stages that's never coming. Why understanding the stages matters, but doesn't fix anything. Understanding that these 4 stages are predictable patterns that the avoidant repeats with everyone is validating. It confirms you're not crazy. It explains the confusing behavior you experienced. It removes blame from you by showing that nothing you did caused the stages. The stages were going to happen regardless of how perfectly you behaved, because the stages are driven by the avoidant's internal dynamics, not by your actions. This understanding can help you heal from the relationship by recognizing you were simply the current person, experiencing patterns that existed before you and will continue after you unless the avoidant addresses their attachment wounds. But understanding the stages doesn't fix the relationship or change the avoidant. You might recognize you're in stage 2 or stage 3. You might predict that stage 4 is coming. But predicting doesn't prevent. The stages will continue unfolding according to the avoidant's internal timeline and triggers, regardless of your awareness of them. You can't love someone out of their attachment patterns. You can't accommodate their stages away. You can't be patient enough or understanding enough to prevent them from moving through all 4 stages and ending up at deactivation. The stages are the avoidance pattern, and only they can change their pattern through sustained therapeutic work most of them never do. Understanding the stages should inform your decision making. If you're in stage 1, understanding that stages 2, 3, and 4 are coming allows you to make an informed choice about whether to continue investing. If you're in stage 2 or 3, understanding that stage 4 is where this is heading, unless the avoidant does serious work, helps you evaluate whether staying is worth the inevitable pain. If you're in stage 4, understanding this is the predictable endpoint of the avoidance pattern helps you release the relationship instead of staying stuck, hoping for return to stage 1 that won't happen without the avoidant transforming fundamentally. The stages also matter because they reveal whether the avoidant is doing work to change their patterns. An avoidant in therapy who's actively addressing their attachment wounds might move more slowly through the stages. They might recognize when they're starting to deactivate and consciously work to stay present instead. They might communicate about their fear instead of just acting it out through withdrawal. They might catch themselves in stage 3 hot and cold and stabilize instead of continuing the inconsistency. If you see an avoidant actively working against their patterns, that's evidence they might be capable of real relationship eventually. But most avoidants move through the stages unconsciously, driven by nervous system responses they're not examining or working to change. Understanding the stages protects you from staying too long in relationships that will never become healthy. You're not waiting to see if things will get better. You're recognizing you're in a predictable pattern that ends in deactivation unless significant therapeutic intervention occurs. You're using your understanding to make empowered choices about what you'll accept and when you'll walk away. You're not taking the stages personally or blaming yourself for them. You're simply recognizing that someone who moves through these 4 stages is someone who's not currently capable of the relationship you need, regardless of how good stage 1 felt. What to do when you recognize the stages. If you recognize you're in the early stages with an avoidant, the first decision is whether to continue. Some people, understanding what's coming, choose to end things during stage 1 or 2 before deeper attachment forms. Others decide to stay, but with clear boundaries about what behavior they'll accept and at what point they'll leave. Either choice is valid. What's not advisable is staying without boundaries, hoping the avoidant will be different, hoping you'll be the exception to their pattern. You won't be the exception unless they're actively doing therapeutic work, and even then, change is slow and non-linear. If you're in stage 3, the hot and cold inconsistency stage, the healthiest choice is usually to enforce boundaries that require consistency or end the relationship. You can tell the avoidant clearly that you need reliability, that hot and cold isn't acceptable, that you're willing to give them space, but you need communication about that space rather than just disappearance, followed by reappearance. You can set a timeline for how long you're willing to continue in the current dynamic before you need to see real improvement. Most avoidants can't meet these requirements without therapy, which means enforcing boundaries usually results in the relationship ending. But ending at stage 3 is better than staying until stage 4's complete deactivation. If you're in stage 4, if the avoidant has completely deactivated, the healthiest choice is accepting the relationship is over and beginning your healing process. Stop trying to get them back. Stop waiting for them to return. Stop hoping that more time or different behavior from you will change their deactivation. Stage 4 is the end of the cycle. The only way out of stage 4 is for you to leave and for the avoidant to do years of therapeutic work, and even then, they'd need to start the work with you completely out of the picture. Staying available during their stage 4 deactivation only teaches them they can deactivate without consequence. Regardless of which stage you're in, consider whether the avoidant is in therapy and actively working on their patterns. This is the only meaningful predictor of whether the relationship has any chance of becoming healthy. An avoidant not in therapy will continue cycling through the stages with you and with every future partner. An avoidant in therapy who's committed to the work might slowly develop capacity to break the pattern. But therapy has to be consistent, long-term, and specifically focused on attachment for it to create real change. An avoidant going to therapy sporadically or working with a therapist who isn't addressing attachment isn't doing the work that would prevent the stages from unfolding. The stages will repeat until the avoidant heals or you leave. These 4 stages are the avoidance pattern, and patterns repeat until they're consciously interrupted through therapeutic work. The avoidant will move through these stages with every partner until they face their attachment wounds and do the painful work of healing them. They'll experience stage 1's intense connection with someone new, thinking this person is different, this time will be different. Then attachment will form, and stage 2 withdrawal will begin. Then stage 3 inconsistency will emerge as they try to manage their fear. Then stage 4 deactivation will end the relationship. And then they'll find someone new and the cycle will start again, with the avoidant never recognizing they're repeating a pattern rather than just experiencing a series of incompatible relationships. You can't fix the avoidance pattern. You can't love them into healing. You can't accommodate your way through the stages into a healthy relationship. The stages will unfold according to their internal timeline, regardless of what you do. Your only power is in deciding what you'll tolerate and when you'll walk away. Understanding the stages gives you that power by showing you what's coming and helping you make informed decisions about whether to stay for what's ahead. Most people, understanding all 4 stages clearly, would choose to leave early rather than experiencing the full pattern. But many people stay because they're hoping to be the exception, hoping their love will be enough, hoping the avoidant will choose them over their fear. And then they experience all 4 stages and end up at deactivation, having learned painfully that hope doesn't change patterns. The stages matter because they show you who the avoidant is right now, not who they might become with years of therapy they're not currently pursuing. Right now, the avoidant is someone who creates intense connection and then systematically destroys it through fear-based withdrawal. Right now, they're someone who will put you through 4 stages that end in emotional deactivation. Right now, they're someone who's not capable of the sustained intimacy and partnership you need. Understanding this allows you to make decisions based on current reality rather than potential future that requires transformation the avoidant isn't currently doing the work to achieve. The stages are what they are. The pattern is what it is. And you deserve better than being the next person who experiences all 4 stages while hoping to be the exception that finally breaks the pattern they've repeated with everyone else.